Hello, my name is Dr. Daniel Debowy. I'm one of the psychiatrists on the Student Mental Health and Counseling Service here at MIT. Today I'd like to talk about staying engaged and focused with a good sense of time and what that means during the COVID-19 situation while we are all staying apart together. I hear a lot of students in virtual sessions that I'm doing these days feeling like they're losing focus or losing a sense that the learning is real, and all of them basically having difficulty with fighting against the sense that every day at home seems the same. So why is it so hard all of a sudden for us to keep time? It's not like we've ever had this kind of disconnection before. And for all of us, it seems like it's a much harder task all of a sudden just to tell one day from the next and to keep on track with our tasks and the activities that we want to engage in. Even our underlying concentration and motivation is often compromised, if only a little bit. And related to that is the sense that what you're doing right now is actually learning, actually doing lab work. Where did that come from? So, I said before that often the experiences of human beings in their everyday life can take on a paradoxical sense of the mystical, especially as we try to understand how our mind reacts as it does to what happens to us. But our sense of time is not magic, and I'm not going to get into a philosophical discussion about whether time actually exists or is a human construct. We are just talking about our brain's ability to have a sense that time is moving forward and to use that sense to differentiate events in our life and to order them into a personal narrative. That's not magic. There's no study at some mystical retreat in the Himalayas in which we can manipulate that sense of time. In fact, that sense of time, like all of our brain functions, all biological processes, is vulnerable to specific pitfalls that can occur when particular cues that it uses are compromised, as they are right now during the COVID-19 situation. Our brains, to have a sense of one event following the next, and to have a sense of personal narrative history, rely on cues. Some of these cues are cues from nature. The sun rises, the sun sets, the tide comes in, the tide goes out, the seasons change. And we have memories of sights and sounds around us, putting a particular memory into spring or summer, or if we can't quite remember, we know that it wasn't winter. But most importantly, on a biochemical level, we have biological clocks that are involved in storing memories, but also are involved in just regulating our physical function and our mental function. Our very sleep cycles depend upon sunlight, or if not direct sunlight, then the sense that we go from night to dawn to day, even when it's cloudy or rainy. When we do not get enough of those cues, or when we compromise them by staring at screens even more than we used to, thereby tricking our brains into thinking that sunlight continues after sunset, these cycles, these internal clocks, get off kilter. They don't function as well. And we'll get into some of the consequences of that in a moment. We also use our higher order brains to set up schedules for ourselves. We enroll in a particular program of study at MIT and enroll in certain classes as part of that course of study. And the professors come up with syllabi, which ask for us to get certain projects done at a particular time. And we set up a schedule to get those projects done, to get our errands done, to try to set a semi-regular wake-up time and bedtime. This is, of course, a COVID-19 schedule for a school child who is home from K through 12 right now. It looks more like on the K end than the 12 end. But these sorts of constructs, schedules that we make for ourselves and try to hold ourselves to, or that are put on us by other people in social interactions, also help us to put particular events in time relative to each other and help memory storage, concentration, and effort. Brain function is highly efficient when we have all of these cues at work, at our disposal. And so we get to bed at a given time. Our sleep is fairly solid because our brains know it's night. We have better energy level the next day. It powers us through day to day, week to week. It helps our focus. We can keep track of tasks, which ones are done, which ones need more work, which ones need to be finished before others, what's remaining to do, and thereby helps to order information that it's more easier for us to concentrate and easier for us to remember things, again, in relation to each other in time. It helps our mind. And more broadly speaking, by ordering those events in time and aiding our memory, gives us a sense of context, gives us a sense that one experience follows another. It doesn't lead to regular confusion as to whether or not we were in our 801 lecture this morning, or whether we had lab duties that afternoon, or vice versa. It underpins our sense of reality, that we are in a given time, and also we'll get into a given place, and that time and place are anchored with particular experiences and particular information. And without that, we begin to feel like we're not really attending lecture. We're not really doing work at lab, because everything is occurring as we think of it, without a given schedule, with our bio clock off kilter, and without us actually traveling through space. And these cues have been altered. We're not keeping regular bedtimes, many of us. Even I have to really put in a lot more effort on this. We're staring at screens all day to do our work, even more than ever before, and it's messing up our sense of sunset for many more students than I'm usually hearing it from. Moreover, as we're sheltering in place, particularly if we're fearful about going outside, and we're trying to be mindful of the advice we're getting from medical professionals and governmental bodies, we're not going outside all that much. And depending on the living space that we're in, we may not be getting a lot of sunlight in there anyway. We have a poor sense of the change of seasons, which is one of those broader cues that I was talking about that we get from nature. And this year, actually, the foliage is late, further making it unclear as to whether it's March or April. Could it even be May at this point? Is it June? And for those of us for whom it's our first year in New England and might be used to the trees already being in full bloom by the time it gets to early mid-spring, it's even more unsettling, even more disorienting. And unless we've been very good about putting in the time and effort for a given schedule, it's going to get off kilter real fast. Some of these lectures are live on Zoom, but some of them are pre-recorded, and we don't have to keep a schedule to attend them, such as it is. And we may not any longer see friends who shared parts of our schedule, who shared parts of our projects. We'll get back to that too. But let me first talk about traveling through space, because that must have sounded a little odd to most of you when I brought it up. Our sense of time actually depends on our sense of spatial change. Even in our relatively sedentary lifestyles as academics and intellectual professionals, we do move around. We go from place to place. Our schedules require undergrads and graduate students who are still taking classes to go to different buildings. And for the most part, the same building, the same room in the same building is going to be where they get particular pieces of information. It's not magic. It actually has to do with one of the key pieces of our central nervous system as far as memory storage is concerned. It's the hippocampus. It's our memory storage and retrieval node. You could think of it, for those of you who are a little bit older, as like the VCR of the brain, or the rewritable DVD player of the brain. For others, it's basically the program that allows for the videos to be taped. Everything's got to go through there when it's being set down initially, when it's being replayed. Now in us, in many sophisticated mammals like cetaceans and primates, it's thought to deal with a lot of other kinds of data, not just where you are at a given time or where you are relative to where you were. It deals with your lectures. It deals with remembering your friends' names. It deals with where you're supposed to order dinner from this evening that you agreed upon with the people you live with. But all of that is still anchored to what the original function of the hippocampus was, which in basically all mammals is a spatial cue storage machine. It's highly active in experiments that are done with mice in mazes, for example. It's one of the first ways in which it was studied. And now that we've done a lot of work on it, there are actually studies in which you can roughly predict where an experimental animal is in a given experimental setup based on relative firing of a hippocampal network, more or less. It works that way in us too. And now that you're sitting in the same place for pretty much all the day and all your work is at the same laptop, which in all likelihood you're keeping in the same place in your living space, and you can't go out on as many errands as you used to, if any at all, particularly if you're not working into your schedule to get outside or to walk around your living space or to get in exercise, that function is skewed. It's not as accurate. Recall's going to be dulled just that little bit or a lot. Because when we are moving, when we are thinking about moving, it's to stay away from other people. And our sense of reality, including the sense of time, but the broader sense that what we're experiencing is our life and it is the same more or less as what it was, is dependent on that social context, on what happens when we talk to other people, how we feel, what thoughts they change in our minds, what information we get from them, what they can help us remember. And when the social context gets changed, and it has been right now, that sense of reality is also compromised because we depend on each other for a lot. We have shared schedules, we have shared tasks, we even help to store those memories having to do with particular spaces and times in our personal narrative, is having certain people present, having certain people repeatedly present, like friends we see in certain lectures. But more than that, we as primates, and particularly as humans, have this whole other set of neurons, this whole other circuitry in our central nervous system, or in our cerebral cortex, called mirror neurons, that enable us to very finely and relatively easily, as compared to other animals, learn from others through mimicry. That it ties together the visual inputs, seeing other people do a thing, and the motor inputs that might be involved in our beginning to learn how to do that thing. It's why we and all of the other primates are very good at learning through watching. And these mirror neurons in humans and in the other great apes are part of a larger network in the brain having to do with empathy, having to do with social relations, having to do with complex tasks that involve working together. Now, without our usual companions, or even with our social circle and our working circle abbreviated right now to some extent, everything seems slightly vaguer and off. And in addition to all the other things that I've been talking about, avoiding others is conflating a sense of fear, a sense of danger, which I talk a little bit more about in my other video here, with our usual empathic functions. And with those two things in conflict, it not only becomes harder for us to feel like our life is the same as it usually is, it's as real as it usually is, but it also gets harder to learn. And for students, that's a pretty big drawback. So there have been a couple of things that I've found have been helpful to students that I've been talking about over video sessions. One of them is to work harder at reinstituting schedules now that the current situation is wearing away at pieces of them here and there. Schedules give regimentation. They allow you to continue a certain practice of behavior that's helpful for your work. It gives you regularity, a sense that there is a certain reassuring sameness from day to day. And yet at the same time, it also gives variety, that there are things that you're only doing on certain days of the week, things that you're doing on only certain days of the month, as you usually would when your movement would be unrestricted. Schedules will also allow you to parcel out work and free time a little bit better, which I can tell you very personally is hard when you are doing all of your work from where you live. So you need to set up schedules and hold yourself to them so that your work doesn't end up seeping into every waking hour of the day. Getting outside on a regular basis as part of that schedule is important. It resets the bio clock. It'll enable you over time to better differentiate day and night on a subconscious level that's involved with sleep cycles and energy restoration and maintenance of concentration. But it also allows you to work off nervous energy, and I would encourage you to see my other talk for a little bit more about that. Schedules also promote us to continue to work at things even when our motivation flags. This is related to a concept from cognitive behavioral therapy called behavioral activation. It's part of a brain midline towards the front. It's part of the frontal cortex. It's called the anterior cingulate cortex. It's involved in reward, and as a result, it's involved in maintaining motivation. It's involved, it fires strongly basically whenever we're coming up with a new grand plan for a certain behavior, whether that's going and fixing a bowl of mac and cheese or sitting down to write a lab report. When we get demoralized, when we get disoriented, it becomes low activity. And that leads to a negative feedback loop in which it gets harder to start tasks again. And so in the principle of behavioral activation, therapist encourages the student that you need to repeatedly try, even if you don't feel like doing a thing, even if you have doubts about your efficacy, because repeated effort at something, even when the plan isn't assembled or carried out, restarts the anterior cingulate back towards a more usual level of firing. And that is a positive feedback loop that will eventually start to restore motivation, not just in the task in question, but more broadly. When you are getting out there as part of your schedule and moving around, you're changing spatial cues for different information. Now, let's say you're saying, well, I can't go outside and watch a Zoom meeting having to do with my, computer science course, my security course. Okay, so the security course will be, you'll have your laptop near to your bed. And then let's say you've got a physics course that you need for your GIRs. Well, that should actually be at the futon outside in the common living area or at the counter in the kitchen. And you keep it the same. Now, this may seem ridiculous, but moving around between the lectures is, again, going to work off that nervous energy. And moving around to particular places for particular information is going to help you to remember that information because it's going to defeat that sense of sameness between all the lectures. Exercise will improve mood and cognition. It releases endorphins. It also helps to reset the bio clock. It leaves us more tired at the end of the day in a healthy way, allowing us to more easily fall asleep and allowing for a higher chance of solidity of sleep. All of these will help us physically and mentally. And when I say mentally, I mean both emotionally and cognitive. And social connection is really the only way that we're going to get through this confusion, get through this situation.